Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willies, your host. As you know, much of what we talk about here at Politics Done Right, uh, irrespective of it being on the progressive side, is the ability to speak to the other side, the ability to coexist because we only have one country and nobody's leaving. Anyhow, Jill Long Thompson is a former Congresswoman from Indiana who taught ethics as a visiting clinical associate professor at the Kelley School of Business and the School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University, Bloomington. Until 2015, she was board chair and CEO of the Farm Credit Administration, a position to which she was appointed by President Barack Obama. She is the author of The Character of American Democracy, Preserving Our Past, Protecting Our Future, and her current book is Across the Aisle, Why Bipartisanship Works for America. It is my pleasure to have you on Politics Done Right. Former Representative Congresswoman Jill Long Thompson. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and thank you for having me on your show. It is a privilege and a pleasure to be here.
Well, let me tell you, first of all, I love the subject because I think until we get to the position where we realize we're one country and we're all going to have to work together somehow to get things done. I'm glad that you wrote a book, and it's an interesting way in which the book was written because it was a lot of authors, really. Why don't you tell
Yes.
me a little bit about what got you to put in all of this together and how you did it?
Indiana University Press actually asked me to produce this book. The director, Gary Dunham, asked me to do this. And I just started reaching out to friends and I would ask them if they were interested in participating and or if they could recommend somebody to participate. And I was really not surprised, but very pleased with the number of people who believe, as I do, that bipartisanship is essential to democracy. I think sometimes because we are so busy with our day-to-day activities, we don't think about what it means to live in a democracy. And it's very important to recognize that the process by which we develop, adopt, execute, and enforce policy and laws, the process is as important as the laws and the policies that we adopt. And if we don't follow a process that is democratic, then we are undermining what we are and what we stand for.
When you talk about process, explain what you mean by process, because right now, a lot of people would tend to believe that the process just isn't working. Some even believe that the process has never worked for some. So what do you call this process? And then I want to pivot that back onto something else, but let's stay on this one for now.
The process has to be fair, it has to be honest, it has to have integrity, and we have to respect everybody's right to participate. And we must respect those with whom we disagree in the process as much as we respect those with whom we agree. I remember growing up hearing a term, great minds all think alike. Well, if that were so, life would be much easier, wouldn't it?
Oh
Because
yeah.
there are lots of great minds. But in fact, great minds don't all think alike. And we need to show respect for people who have different experiences, different knowledge, different perspectives. And we actually end up with better policy when we incorporate the input and make sure that everybody has a seat at the table. You have probably seen these data, but McKinsey did some research on corporations, and those corporations that have diversity in their executive management, and diversity, it includes ethnic diversity, racial diversity, gender diversity, they outperform financially those companies that don't have the diversity. In the legislative process, the legislators who reach across the aisle and work with uh, members of the other party are more successful at getting legislation adopted than those who just want to work with their own party. And so not only is it the right thing to do in terms of democratic values, we get better response, better results. We're stronger when we recognize that everybody has and should have a seat at the table.
I think I've had, originally I wasn't uh, a President Biden supporter, but I've learned to admire President Biden in that a lot of what he's done, he's done both sides, right? He when he negotiated the infrastructure bill, it was a very bipartisan bill, and he took the opinions when he negotiated things that really required a certain values that folks on the left has. He also did that appropriately with the right kind of negotiation vis-a-vis when it came out to the IRA. So I mean, I think he has shown a balance in what bipartisanship should look like, more so when one looks at it than anybody else. What are your thoughts, though, of those presidents who, in effect, failed the model that, let's say, a President Biden followed, and to some extent, even President Obama in the way he negotiated the Affordable Care Act, in as much as I had a whole lot of problems with that.
Well, I think that it's important to recognize that negotiation and compromise are central to the democratic process. And not only do we get better decisions when we do that, but those are the values of democracy. And there are values that are recognized worldwide regarding people who have character. And I think to be a good leader, you have to be a person of character. You have to be principled and you have to have integrity. And among those shared values regarding people who have character are respect for others, caring for others, trustworthiness, and there are others as well. But I think that President Joe Biden is very much a reflection of those values. He respects others and he has no problem reaching out to people with whom he disagrees. Now, they may argue, but generally they argue respectfully. And respect for others is essential to the democratic process. It's also essential to good decision making.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I want to do a quick little segue here because this is something that continues to bother me with respect to the Senate and things like the filibuster, et cetera. Right now, uh, I think mathematically speaking, the Senate is not a very democratic institution just based on the structure of 50 senator, or rather 100 senators, 50 states, two senators from every state, irrespective of size. And then we have the other issue of having to get supermajorities for several issues that pretty much, whereas we get very concerned about what many would call the tyranny of the majority, it seems like that gives a minority view, a larger tyranny, if you will, in that not only are senators not represented based on population, but even in the structural nature of the Senate, it even gives those that much more power. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you have expressed my concerns very well. I think the challenge is that democracies are made up of humans, and we have to have checks and balances in the system. And sometimes those checks and balances work very well at protecting individual rights and the democratic process. Sometimes they do not, because it is human nature to want what we want and not want necessarily what someone else wants. That's how we are as humans. I actually have a doctoral minor in social psychology and have studied human behavior because my area of research was consumer economics in my PhD program. And we just have a way as humans of seeing things the way we want to see them rather than as they actually are. And that's why democracy and the values of democracy are so important, because our biases can be offset, if you will, by others who also have biases, but biases that are different from our own. And then every once in a while, you do run into somebody who really does seek the truth and does the research necessary to provide the information to make good decisions. But I think democracy is very challenging, but it's the best approach because you get better decisions than if you're in another form of government. And we just have to keep working and fighting hard to ensure that democratic principles are upheld in the process of adopting policy, executing it, and enforcing it.
Interestingly, if you take a look at your book, you have folks writing pieces together like who would think Trent Lott and Tom Daschle would write a piece together? Or then you have, I mean, I saw the two of them together, and said, oh, interesting, but it's great to see that. And then of course you have Todd Young on Reflections. But tell me, who, how did you go about choosing these people for the book and the order in which you put it in the book?
Well, I reached out to the Bipartisan Policy Center. It's a not-for-profit organization that is bipartisan that works to advance bipartisanship in policymaking. And I also reached out to the Association of Former Members of Congress. And I have donated all the royalties that the book earns to those two organizations because in promoting the book, I don't want to be promoting it and then having some kind of financial reward. I taught ethics and
Right.
I have an issue with that, an ethical issue with that. So, and I know that they will use the money for the greater good of the country, but I had considerable help in reaching out to, now I do know Tom Daschle and have met Senator Lott, but don't know him personally. But by working with the Bipartisan Policy Center and the Association of Former Members of Congress, it allowed me to reach out to many people that I respect but did not have contact information for. And then regarding the order of the book, I always think it's important to defer to people who have more expertise in certain areas than I do. And I deferred to Gary Dunham, the director of IU Press, on the order because I thought he had a better sense of how to how to put the book together, if you will.
Now we are two more questions. We are in dire straits as a country. I mean, earlier on in our discussion, you made a very important point that leadership require ethics, it requires character, it requires all these things. But the thing about it is the American people pick leadership. We are the ones who pick leadership. We have one of our candidates that's running, and I don't mean to be partisan here, but these are just statements of fact. We have a person that is running for the presidency that is simply simply does not have the morality or the character to hold that position. It is also somebody that has never ever won the popular vote. In fact, the American people have always made the right decision based on the number of votes. However, based on what I call the undemocracy of our Constitution, we have gotten this person elected and could again, if the pivots fall in the wrong place. What can we do in the future? Like I said, the American people seem to make the right choices, but you spoke about structural democracy before. What can we do to ensure that the structural democracy comes out with the right answers?
Well, I think that one area where we really need to put some focus is on information literacy. I am old enough to remember how prevalent local news outlets were.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that while we can be frustrated with stories, news stories that we read, and opinion pieces that are written by editorial boards, the reality is professional news reporting and doing what you are doing, it actually contributes to better decision making, not just in politics, but in business and in a whole host of areas. I think that we need to address information literacy in K through 12, but also in higher education. I also think that we need some reforms in how, I don't think it, I know it. We need reforms in how we draw congressional districts. They need to be drawn by independent commissions, not by politicians whose political future is going to be affected by the congressional lines that are drawn. Gerrymandering has become a major issue for this country, and we have more politicians who are representing districts that are very safe for them. In the last 50 years, I am the only Democrat to have been elected to represent the district that I represented in Northeast Indiana. The districts have changed and the lines have changed, but that part of the state of Indiana, and I was elected for 3 terms. And one term was short because it was a special election that took place on March 28th, 1989, rather than in November the year before. I want to be completely honest about that. But we need districts that are more balanced, because if you are in a district that is more balanced, then politically, not just is it a good idea that reflects character, but politically, you have to listen to both sides, or you won't get reelected. And so I think that the way we draw congressional districts is very important. But I also think providing better information on the information that we have access to. Social media platforms are notorious, many of them, for the dishonesty that is posted on them. And there's research that shows that something that is false gets distributed more widely and more rapidly than the truth. And that's a real problem in a democracy.
That sure is. Now, have you ever heard of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact that says you've heard about it? Or
I have, but I'm not overly familiar with
yeah,
it.
the only reason I'm saying that is what it does is it says, since we know it's almost impossible to get a constitutional amendment to get rid of, let's say, the electoral college, the idea is that if we have enough states that adds up to 270 electoral votes, that no matter who wins that state, the popular vote winner would be selected, given that the states have states' rights that allow them to decide. It's amazing because some will complain, but hey, that's what state rights is. We we can create the laws that by which we're governed. I'm hoping right now. I think we're short about 3 or 4 states to get that done. I'm hoping that at some point that gets done. But my last question to you is always the same for everybody. What should I have asked you that I didn't?
Well, I think you've covered just about everything that is relevant to the book Across the Aisle, Why Bipartisanship Works for America. I would just say that it's very important that we continue to have these discussions, because they are critical to our democracy continuing. We didn't become the strongest nation in the world by some random process. Democracy works, and it works best when we tell the truth. It's like in a family, when we are honest in our families, but also respectful to the family members with whom we disagree, the family is stronger. It's very complex in this age of large populations and diversity and technology. I think that, for example, raising children today would be such a challenge, because there are just so many things to be thinking about and doing every day, and there's so little time for reflection. But in a democracy, we are all responsible for making it work, and we need to figure out as a nation how we get better information to people, how we learn to accept information that is true but that we don't like, and learn how to work together and to disagree in ways that are not disagreeable.
Love that. Former Congresswoman, Indiana Congresswoman Jill Long Thompson, and author of Across the Aisle, Why Bipartisanship Works for America. All the information for getting the book will be in the links within our blog as well. Thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Thank you, and thank you for what you're doing.
we spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead, number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.